thanks for coming to the session. And we do apologize we didn't have any music. That was me. Music in the forefront. We typically like to have the music, but you guys have been great silent entertainment. My name is Alfred Ojukwu. We're doing BRK 3505. I'm a senior consultant out of New York, New Jersey, and also a certified trainer. I'm here with?
I am Joe Lurie. I'm a senior consultant out of the Boston area, also a certified trainer working with MCSA, Microsoft Consulting Services, Northeast.
And just really quick, we typically like to go through who we are so we can interact with you guys. We've been in IT for about 20 plus years working in the same space, both server and client technologies, most recently with Intune and as well as Windows Server 2016. I enjoy sports, of course, and traveling.
And I'm from Boston. I have been a certified trainer since 2000, so a little over 16 years now. I consult mostly in client upgrades and server upgrades and SCCM migrations, Intune as well. And you can see my fun fact, what is what? Yeah, so that's my fun fact. Whether it's fun or not, you all decide if it's fun or not. So I'll just say fact. I have never watched a single Star Trek episode or a single Star Trek movie at all. And if I happen to flip the channel and it's on a TV, I don't even stay there. So done.
Credibility.
Star Wars fan from 1979 to 1983, pretty much.
You said give me a break.
So, all right, let's move slides and let's see what we have coming up.
All right, we'll forgive you for that one. So great. We are going to focus today on identity with Windows Server. This exam has not been written yet. It's still in development. So those of you guys that are planning to run out and take it, it won't be there. Focus on 7740. But the truth is, once you start studying for the Server 2016 exam, the key thing is to remember the differences that you see between 2012, 2008, and Server 2016. This exam focuses on Active Directory, this component on Active Directory, and all the managing and maintaining skills you have to have in this space, as well as identity and certificate services and ADFS. How many people work in the identity space today? Oh, you guys are going to blow through this, man. This is awesome.
How many of you took the 7410, which is Server 2012 exam?
Or 12, or...
Well, I actually 410s when I'm first asking
about. Wait, how many people are certified in the...
So there's a few of you. So the 7410 exam for Server 2012 maps roughly to this exam. If you took that exam and still remember that kind of information, just learn the new stuff. And the rest of the exam is, you know,
if you still remember the old stuff,
exactly,
then learn the new stuff.
Right. How many of you call Server 2012 old stuff, right? How many of you are still running Server 2003 in your organizations? Don't be shy. So, yes. All right, federal government, banking, healthcare, those are all still running Server 2003. Those are the ones that you want to upgrade and they're still running Server 2003, in some cases.
We have 5 sections. We'll go through each section. Our intention, again, in these sessions is to make sure we dive a little deeper into what the technology is and what you need to know for the exam. We will also give you some ideas around exam tips. Again, unfortunately, because the exam has not been written yet, we can't tell you how to...
It's been written, right? It hasn't been completed yet.
It's not available for us to take across the hall.
Right. As of Monday when I looked, the official release date, so
it's coming.
is next Monday. So this is September something 2016. So as of September something 2016, 2 days ago, the official release date was October 3rd, 2016. But anything can happen, anything can change. So I don't want to say, the official release date is October 3rd. Go rush out and take it on October 3rd because it may not be available.
It's coming.
So just want to watch out on the Microsoft Learning website for this exam.
Okay, so we'll start with the Active Directory domain services. We break it down into what's in the actual domain. Again, what's changed with Server 2012 and Server 2016? Not a whole heck of a lot. We can see here that some of the skills that you had in 2012 still apply, and this sort of lists them out. We're going to break them out a little further as we go into the presentation.
So first we're going to talk about adding a new forest, and notice we put up a PowerShell command there, install -AD DS forest. When you install a new forest, and some of you may remember this, you also are installing a new domain just because you are. So you don't need the install ADDS domain command in this one. You just need the forest and what the name of it's going to be. That you want to install the management tools. If you want to install a new domain, you have the install ADDS domain. And of course, you can also go through Server Manager and install that way, but we're going over the tools that they're going to ask you about on this exam. Before you can use these PowerShell commands, you do have to install the PowerShell management tools or the Active Directory management tools. So install Windows feature. You can see it up there. I'm not going to read it to you. But basically name AD domain services, include management tools, and restart the machine. So we have, again, a couple of commands there. These slides will be made available to you. We don't like to read slides word for word. So just remember there are PowerShell commands to do everything you need to do for setting up your Active Directory, forest, tree, domain.
And so the other thing to think about with Active Directory and Server 2016, in the exam, they will challenge you to see if you have knowledge of Active Directory versus Azure Active Directory and what's available. Think about the services that you get in Active Directory that support the directory services, certificate services, as well as LDAP, and as well as Active Directory rights management services. These are all available on-prem itself. So as you're going through the exam and you're preparing your Active Directory, listen to questions that are focused on the on-prem solution so that you don't have to worry about Azure Active Directory being one of the answers that you might need to answer.
And also remember about the read-only domain controller. If you're still running Server 2003, you may not have ever used a read-only domain controller. It does exist. It is a real thing. And they're going to ask you, do you know when you should use a read-only domain controller? Maybe it's a non-secure location. It's just a read-only disk, gets a copy of the database, nothing writable. So keep that in mind also, how to stage the RODC and how to create the RODC. And
for just so that you guys, those are that are curious, Azure Active Directory only supports two services, the Azure Active Directory Access Control and Active Directory for service management. So those are the only two services that are available in Azure Active Directory. So keep that in mind, as opposed to 5 that are available in Active Directory on-prem.
And then we have some additional functions here if you want to install from media. Now, install from media is handy if you have a large domain controller database. Let's say that I have a slow WAN link to a small branch office that will be getting a writable domain controller. If I run DC promo or install ADDS domain, it's going to copy the entire database down. So instead of copying it over the slow WAN link, I can copy it onto media. I can ship it over to that location or drive it there myself and use that option instead, install from media. Install ADDS domain controller, install, and then hyphen install installation media path and the path to the media. I'm going to go back to that last slide for a second.
Apologies.
By default, when you install a domain controller, it's going to be a global catalog server. So if you don't want it to be a global catalog server, you have to specify that. And you'll see here we have the hyphen no global catalog command. What's one reason you don't want it to be a global catalog server? Universal groups work with global catalog server. The big reason as you're being tested why you don't want it to be a global catalog server is the infrastructure master FSMO role. The infrastructure master role, and we're going to talk about the FSMO roles in a minute, but the infrastructure master role, its job is to resolve inconsistent, I'm going to put this in air quotes, resolve inconsistencies between cross-domain referenced objects. In other words, you have a user in one domain who is a member of a group in another domain. That user in domain A changes her last name because she got married. And so now there's an inconsistency with what the SID and last name is on the other domain. The infrastructure master server kind of resolves that for you. But the global catalog never has inconsistencies. So the infrastructure master server role should not be on a global catalog server. And that's true all the way back to Windows 2000 Active Directory. The recommendation is if you want all FSMO roles to work, take the infrastructure master role off the global catalog. So again, for testing, why don't you want it to be a global catalog? Because the infrastructure master role is on that, will be on that. Question in the back?
Is that still the case if every DC in the forest is a global catalog?
The question is that still the case if every DC in the forest is the global catalog? Yes, your infrastructure master server role is not working. It's not, I mean, it's not like you're going to get an error on it or anything. It's just there's no reason for it to work.
So in the exam, they typically have a question of servers with specific roles, a certain version of a server, server in 2008, server 2012. The key is to make sure that you're placing the global catalog server on a server that's not the infrastructure master or the IM.
And you see that last command in the third bullet point, I think it's the third one, move infrastructure master role if necessary. That's not made up for the exam like as a distractor answer. That's really what you would do if you're creating a domain controller and it was going to have global catalog and infrastructure. Move the infrastructure master role if necessary.
What's the other way to move a FSMO role? Anybody know? Or operations master role? Anybody know?
You can seize it.
Seize it.
What else? Yep. TDS, ADUC, Active Directory using computers.
There you go. Yeah. So
We have actually have a slide coming up on that in a couple minutes.
the key here is we're putting it in PowerShell because that's the newest form of testing that you'll see. They're testing you on this specific way of doing things because a lot of administrators are using PowerShell to automate scripts and run things like Chef and Puppet to be able to automate the process of doing things. So it's important to know the script, the language behind it. They will test you on it.
And in a lot of cases, your exam question will tell you what has to be done, and on the right-hand side for the answer pane, it's going to be a bunch of PowerShell commands. And on the left-hand side, it's going to be a bunch of blank spaces. We have to click the right PowerShell command in the right order to the right side, or to the whatever. Yeah, the right side. So you want to know what the PowerShell commands are for that reason alone. Now, also we have, when you're creating a domain controller, you have to worry about DNS issues. DNS is very big with Active Directory. If you can't reach the domain controller, you can't get the database down. I guess install from media would be different, but you can't register your SRV server, SRV records for the domain controller. So some things you want to look at for DNS issues, and this isn't just specific to Active Directory, but net logon events in the event viewer 5774, 5775. These indicate that the domain controller can't dynamically register its records. If that's the case, maybe it's because secure dynamic updates are selected or not selected, right? So you want to take a look at that stuff as well. And you can use, I think we have DC-diag. Yep, DC-diag test register, or registered DNS and DNS domain to check for DNS issues as well. All right, this next section, and we're just going to skip over the pretty lady here with all the bullet points because it's just bringing up a new section. So automating our user accounts. So we have a picture here of Active Directory Administrative Center. This isn't really new to 2016, but it's newer than it was, from 2008. I think it came in 2012, even R2. So this is kind of an extension to Active Directory users and computers. Everything you can do there, you could do an ADUC, you can do an ADAC. ADAC.exe is actually how you would launch it, or you can browse to it through your start menu. One of the cool features of ADAC is in the bottom corner, if I could remove this big window here, it says Windows PowerShell history. So even if I click on a username and then in the actions pane I click change password and I change the password, there's a PowerShell command running in the background, and I can see what that PowerShell command is. So if you have your lab set up, I would use ADAC and I would go through some of those PowerShell commands so that you get familiar with it. Other ways to create user accounts, we still can import using CS, VDE, LDIFT. These are still options and still definitely testable. We can create templates, which create the user account, already added to the groups, maybe office locations already set up, and you can copy and fix the name and whatnot.
Are there any major differences between ADAC in 2012 R2 and 2016?
The question is, are there any major differences between ADAC in 2012 R2 and in 2016? I think the Windows PowerShell history, I don't think that was available in 20. All right, then no. That would have been the only main difference.
Did they fix the selection bug? Do you know about that?
I personally don't know about that. On the plus side, though, you won't be tested on whether they fixed that bug. So, yeah, I don't know if they did. Also, out of ADAC, you also get a recycle bin. You delete a user. Again, you have the Active Directory recycle bin. And fine-grained password policies. This is something big. The password settings object, fine-grained password policies. Again, not new to 2016, but newer than some of you might know about. So one thing to keep in mind is, back in the olden days of Active Directory, we're talking about from Windows 2000, Server 2003, even into maybe as late as 2003, the password policy was set at the domain. not at the OU, not at the group, not at the user, is at the domain. All users in this domain had the same password policy. Now we can set up password settings objects and link them to users into groups, not to OUs. That's going to be big on the exam. You want all these users are in this one OU. You need to make sure that they have to change their password every 30 days. The rest of the company can stay with their 90 days or whatever that setting is. How do you do it? Create a fine-grained password policy and link it to the OU would be wrong. Link it to a group. Put them all into a group. Now, one thing you can do, this may be coming up soon, I'm not sure, but you can create a shadow group. A shadow group is basically used for that purpose. It takes all the members of an OU and adds them into a group. And that way you can just link the fine-grained password policy to the shadow group. So the question is that different than a query-defined group? Query-defined group probably has more options available. Really, the shadow group is, the main purpose is to mimic an OU more than any other queries. The last thing I want to show you here is what is new to 2016. There's a couple of new things. And I put here time-bombed groups. And it's actually not called time-bombed groups. I just never remember the actual name of it. Time-limited groups, maybe. So the time-limited group means this. A user calls you and says, I need to be added to the Server 1 admins group. I have something I need to do, so it'll take me about 30 minutes. You add him to a time-limited group, which adds him to this group for a period of 30 minutes. You don't have to remember to go in and take him out of the group. His token expires in 30 minutes. Now, if a user is a member of multiple groups, basically what happens is your token is, it uses the same thing with what permissions would do. It would figure out what's the most restrictive out of all the groups, time-limited groups that you're a member of. We have conditional access control, mostly used for accessing like applications and whatnot, but you can say, as long as this machine has running this patch level, whatever, it can connect Active Directory on this application. I'm just saying as a,
No.
The question is 30 minutes static? I'm just saying, 30 minutes. I could have X number of minutes. It's not static, it's whatever you want it to be. It's whatever you want it to be. Just don't do it like, 1,440 minutes or something like that. Although I don't know what the max is, to be honest with you. Federation Services, that's you.
It's not going there. It's still there.
New to 2016, Federation Services now supports LDAP v3.
There you go.
There we go.
Just so that's one thing to keep in mind. There are a lot of new features that have been provided through ADFS. We'll see that later on in Section 5. But just for the Active Directory option, they wanted to talk about Federation Services. LDAP v3 is the next, the component that's supported, as well as conditional access, further claims-based modifications with conditional access in ADFS.
Yep, here we go. We're just talking about this, right? So the Kerberos token lifetimes basically determined on all your group memberships. The ticket generating ticket, we got these as, words, but acronyms. Ticket generating ticket based on the shortest group membership. And then the session ticket is based on that TGT for the domain group membership. Now, this does require a new forest function level. So how many of you want to run right out and upgrade your forest to Server 2016 forest function level just to try this one new feature? All of you?
That's great.
So what you can do in this case is you can create a new type of forest. We have that coming up soon anyway, but a new type of forest that runs the forest function level, and then you can also use like shadow groups for that as well. Put the administrators from one group into the new forest, and you can try it out from there.
We even have an animation for it. Groups, users, members, access a certain amount of time. They have access to using the TGT to the lifetime of the group.
And the session ticket, you have shortest of the TGT and resource local domain group, and that probably is the last one, yeah.
No, that's okay.
All right, so the privilege account management, this is where we're talking about, again, kind of creating a shadow group in the other forest that has the right forest function level. So make sure users have separate admin accounts. That's just common sense anyway, but as admin, put in a request to have the domain admin rights for X number of minutes, not 60, not 30, but X number of minutes. Gets approved, and then they use their new login, the new admin account to log in.
So one thing to say about this is to remember in the exam, again, for those, how many people have never taken an exam?
That's a good
certification
question, too.
exam? I forgot to ask. Good. So this is important for you all to hear, and so some of you that have taken in the past. They will ask you to order steps in the put questions in the right order. So, yeah. So 1 through
Steps in the right
6.
order.
Yep. You have 1 through 6. They might have you drag it from the left, put it on the right, and make sure it's in the right order. If you do not have it in the right order, you get no points for that question.
Right, it's wrong.
Right? It's just the way it is. I wish they could give partial credit, but honestly, I guess that doesn't make sense either, does it?
So the right answers in the right order. It's a full, all or none type of question. Something like this where we have 6 very specific steps in very specific order.
Know the steps. Again, one of the things we stress is check out the virtual labs, make sure that you're actually getting in there and testing out this feature. Understand what steps you're taking to actually give the privileged access management. Because if you get a case study that has you walk through the process of having an administrator provision that access that's required, this is how you're going to have to do it. And you have to know what those steps are. It's not enough to just know what the technology is anymore. You have to know how to perform it. And what was that called? Like performance-based testing?
Yeah. So there is a performance-based testing. How many of you, and this isn't for this exam, but how many of you will be taking 697? That was the session earlier today. 70-697?
Client exam.
Oh, no one. So I'll stop right now. No. That's 473, I believe.
Yeah, the question.
Oh, so the question is, which is the upgrade exam?
From 2012 R2, MCSA, or
Yep.
Yes.
To this, that's 743, which actually I'm told became available this week.
Yep.
We didn't advertise anywhere because we were told that this afternoon that it became available this week. So if you want to give it a shot, it's available right down the hall.
So again,
Half price. I don't know if
really-
you all know this, but exams are half price this week.
You guys
Well, as
know?
long as you sign up for it here and take it here, it's half price this week.
Are you done? Just kidding.
I'll interrupt you when you start again. I'll let you know if I'm done.
So 7740, which Joe and Chris did earlier. You saw George did 7041, 7742 is now. All 3 of them are really a combination of what you get in 7743. So if you already have the 2012 MCSA or MCSE, this is the way to get there. All they're testing you on are the changes that you've seen between 2012 and 2016.
Yep. So the question is there only one exam? What it is there's, I haven't taken this one upgrade exam, but upgrade exams in the past I can talk about. Upgrade exams in the past were you would have, let's say there's a bank of 75 questions for the exam, you would have gotten 50. Instead, you get about 20. And then you hit end exam and move on to the next
Right.
exam. End exam, move on to the next. So you're sitting down once, but taking a subset of actual questions from those other exams.
Once you're done with each section, you cannot go back.
Yeah, right.
So you might have 20 for the first bank, another 20 for the second bank, and another 20 for the third bank. And it's interesting because some people go in there and like, oh, I'm almost done, and all
And
of
all
a
of a
sudden
sudden,
you
a whole
realize
new exam starts up again.
you can't go back. So something to keep in mind.
Yep.
Can we use vouchers to take exams?
So the question is, can we use vouchers? You sign up for the exam like you normally would. So if you have a voucher, yes. But then there's a promo code that we would use to actually mark it down to half price. Now, I don't know if it's half price of the vouchered price.
Oh, they're good.
Are
You're
you
good.
FTE? Anyway, so we don't work for View, for Pearson View. But as far as we know, you can still use vouchers. You don't have to get the half price promo code here. You can pay full price or whatever you want to pay. Higher than half, I suppose.
Well,
but you get it. All right, let's go.
Okay, let's keep going.
All right, so we've been talking about creating domains. We've been talking about managing domains, managing user accounts. But let's say we have a server that we need to join to the domain, not a domain controller, it's joining a server to the domain. Some of us know we can always go to the system control panel, properties, and put in the domain name and our credentials. So we can still do that. You notice we have a little just note in there saying that it goes to the default container. That default container is still the computer's container, like a user is still the user's container. There is a command I think we have coming up on a slide coming up that you can actually change that default container if you want. It's redir, REDIRCMP, and then whatever you want the OU to be by the fully qualified domain name of the OU if you want to change that computer's container to something else. Anyway, so system control panel. You can also use PowerShell, add computer name, dash computer name, then the computer name, and then to the domain name you want to add it to. And of course, you can add your credentials. You can use PowerShell desired state configuration, which some of us have had desktops and servers that have fallen out of the domain for whatever reason. This DSC kind of makes sure that if it falls out of the domain, it's out of compliance, right? And that's what DSC is all about, is making sure that servers stay within compliance. So you can use DSC to make sure it's in the domain. And then you can do an offline domain join using djoin.exe. Basically, you pre-stage it on one end, and then if the server is not going to be connected to the domain controller, you can use djoin on the target. When you use djoin on the first side of it, you actually create a provisioning file, and then you run it on the server itself and run that provisioning file. All right, here's the FSMA roles, the flexible single master operations or operations master roles. Now, we asked you before, what are some ways to move them, right? The infrastructure master might have to move, or you're going to be doing maintenance on your PDC emulator, so you want to move that. The PDC emulator is up and running. You just want to move it during the maintenance period of 3 hours or 3 days or 3 weeks. Or the PDC emulator crashed, and it's not going to come back up, and you need a PDC emulator. So that would be seizing a role. What we have here is you can still do it the old-fashioned way, right, through ADUC to do the 3 PDC emulator, RID master, and infrastructure master. You can still use Active Directory domains and trust to do which one am I missing? The domain naming master and the schema master by using Active Directory schema. So you can still do it the old-fashioned way, or you can do it through PowerShell. Now you'll see what we have here is a little table with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's because the PowerShell command we have in the C's and transfer, the move-AD Active Directory server master operation role, that you can type out RID master, you can type everything out, or you can reference it by number. And we just put that. You probably won't be tested on that, but that's just something for your own knowledge, so when you're doing this for real. And the only difference between C's and transfer is the force at the end of the command. Everything else is exactly the same.
So so the next section goes into creating and managing Active Directory groups and OUs. Now, again, I say this, but I mean it in the best terms. Not a lot has changed in Server 2016. If you don't know it already, you can still study the same content to understand how Active Directory groups, users and groups work. And here's a basic view of the Active Directory Administrative Center that shows being able to enable the control of Active Directory, the module itself for Active Directory, and how you can actually create groups through using the UI itself. So what you should know, obviously, I wouldn't say obviously, I always say that all the time, the difference between security groups and distribution group. One allows you to apply permissions based on a group. If you just use a distribution group, you can only provide them access, but there's no security components tied into it. It's more like a basic...
It's an email group. So you do want to know that, and you may get questions around, you created you created a global group, and you added these users to it, and you went to assign permissions, and whatever, the permissions, it wasn't an option. So, make sure that it's a security group, not a distribution group, something to that effect. So make sure you understand the difference between them. Again, security group assigns permissions, distribution group sends email. A security group can also be email enabled, right? You can have an email address in a security group as well. Now, you'll also notice that we have like some stars up there next to group name and SAM account name and stuff like that. There's also these types of questions on the exams called hotspot questions, where it's going to say, here's the tool, where would you click to do this? And you simply just click, and that's a hotspot answer, wherever the appropriate answer is. That might be down here, which checkbox would you have wanted to select, or it might be in the top where you're selecting a global group versus a domain local group or versus a universal group. Now, this also doesn't...
Or both.
Or both, right. This also doesn't go back, this isn't new to 2016, but changing a global group to a domain local group, if you select global group and you've already hit apply, whatever, like in this case, we haven't even hit apply and OK yet, but because you can tell because nothing's grayed out, if you selected a global group and you say, you know what, I actually need to make that a domain local group, that option's not available to you. It's grayed out. If you want to change a group from global to domain local or the other way around, you can change it to universal group first and then change it. You don't have to wait any amount of time. You hit global, universal, apply, and then domain local, apply. You just need that middle ground step of universal group to do that.
Group nesting?
Group nesting. which is what it sounds like, right? So I'm a member of the sales group. I'm also a member of the administrators group. I'm also a member of the All Boston Users group.
Just
So-
in case you didn't know what the.
So, I'm sorry?
What's next?
No, I'm a member of one group that's nested inside of another one. No, I was getting there, though. So the Boston group, I'm a member of that one because the sales and the sales managers are both nested into the Boston admin, whatever, the Boston group. So keep in mind, your effective permissions is going to be, you're in a group that's a member of another group. You're getting permissions to whatever that other group also has permissions to. And we put a couple of PowerShell commands. We've been talking about PowerShell for the last, 30 minutes. So a couple new PowerShell commands, not new, but a couple PowerShell commands, new AD group, add AD group member, and stuff like that.
Okay, first practice
Is
question.
there a question?
Yeah, can we expect so since I saw you had Pam listed there, which is
Privileged access management.
which is Mem, but since if we can expect a question that asks us to reference Pam or Mem, can we expect on the groups a question that might reference that distribution list or distribution groups are used for Azure Active Directory and Office 365 groups?
So the question was, can we expect, if we have questions around Pam and Mim, will we have questions around distribution groups being used for Azure Active Directory? This does not test you on Azure Active Directory Connect capabilities. It's really looking for ADFS and identity, anything you can configure on the server itself. You may see some questions around tools that are tied into it, but it primarily focuses on the server platform and the features that are enabled when you click, when you turn on components on the server itself. So, typically, I don't think.
I'm going to say no.
The
Short answer is no, but here's why.
because it's not an Azure exam, but it
Right.
will have questions focused on how do I set up identity for Server 2016.
Do you know if they have any sort of PowerShell commands to pull nested group membership out of, actually pull membership of all nested groups within a group?
The question is there a PowerShell command to pull all nested group memberships out of a group that has nested groups? I'll be honest, I don't know that answer.
I don't know either.
So I don't.
Yep.
But the rest of the
He
room
was
knows
really
the answer. We don't know the answer. The rest of the room knows the answer.
It's
to
like
that.
we've tried it. We've already tried it. It was one of those Easter eggs.
Here's we have practice questions throughout this. So here's our first practice question. You are the administrator for a domain named corp.contoso.com. You image a new server named Server1 and want to join the server to the domain. You decide to use PowerShell. You log on to the server and open an elevated PowerShell window and enter your credentials. What command should you use? Add computer Server1, domain name Contoso, whatever, corp.contoso. Add computer Server1, domain controller DC1. Add AD computer service account, computer name Server1. Add AD computer service account, account name Server1.
Which one do you think? We're not even going to do. Which one do you guys think it is?
A.
Somebody's done this before, right? Yeah, you got it.
Okay. To be honest with you, coming up with the practice questions aren't hard. Coming up with believable distractors is the hardest part of that whole process. Couple of tips. We've been giving you tips throughout the whole section, but no PowerShell commands. I think we've drilled that in. Know your PowerShell commands. Know your FSMO roles. Again, know what they do. Know how to move them, seize them, when you should forcibly move a role. The group types and scopes haven't really changed, but know how to change them on your own if you need to go, again, from global to domain local, what a security or distribution group is. And again, DSC, which is PowerShell's desired state configuration, can be used to join a server to the domain and then keep it there. Make sure it's always in compliance. Rejoin if necessary.
Okay, section 2 covers managing and maintaining Active Directory services, and we dive in a little bit deeper into the components that allow authentication and account policies to work in Active Directory. You'll see a lot more on group managed service accounts, the KCD, the Kerberos Constraint Delegation, and service principal names, all features that you may or may not have used throughout your career. Again, not much has changed, but they're looking for you to understand, explain how you understand things that as it ties into PowerShell or being used in a business, or case scenarios that actually call out those requirements.
So basically with service accounts, we know service accounts are used to run a service, right, or to authenticate for a service. But service accounts, the problem is password management, making sure that the service account password doesn't expire, it doesn't get changed. So we have managed service accounts and group managed service accounts. That, again, that really hasn't changed since 2008 R2, maybe. So it hasn't changed the last couple of versions. So we don't have a lot of new stuff here, but to create one, new AD service account, restrict a single computer. That's for a service account or, actually, oh, the next one's a group managed.
That one, the first one's the managed service account, and then the.
Oh yeah, so and again, or the add AD service account, right? So minimum one domain controller, so must have been 2012, must be running 2012, and that's the forest function level. I think would have to be at minimum 2012.
Yep.
And we started talking about KDS root key, add KDS root key effective immediately, and then the service account as well.
And lastly, set SPN, KCD.
Oh, go ahead. I started with, but.
Okay, and just one of the exam tips, if it requires KCD, just realize that IS might require the trust in the computer for the delegation to happen.
Yep.
And then the last piece is the set SPN command. Again, it's all about the service principal name. Make sure you know how to configure a service principal name. Nothing tricky about that. It really is the same old SPN process. If you want to pull up your commands, set SPN -A, -L, look at those, understand how they're set up and the type of services that you're configuring them for. They will test you on it because there might be a reason why a specific service isn't running and it's not being enumerated in the Active Directory attribute as a service that's allowed to run. So something to keep in mind.
Would there be a question about the set SPN and just going a different route and editing the attribute on the actual object?
So that's a good question. Is there a question around the set SPN and then going around and editing the attribute on a specific object? Not specifically, no, because really they're just testing on whether you know how to configure it. They might give you a command line or they might give you a process to do it. Now, you might see a question that might say, go edit it on the attribute, but may not see anything that says set SPN. That's still the same answer, right? It's the one that's most correct when it comes to answering this exam. Again, that's something, another tip to kind of think about. They might give you four decent answers. One may be more correct than the other.
Also keep in mind that on the Microsoft Learning page for this exam, we tell you that there's 5 major sections to this exam. It breaks down saying this section is 15 to 20% of the exam, this section is 30 to 35% of the exam, this one is 5 to 10% of the exam. Use your study time wisely, right? Yeah. Don't spend 4 hours studying a 5 to 10% of the exam and 30 minutes studying a 30 to 35% of the exam. Something like set SPN is probably somewhere closer to the 5 to 6% or 1 to 5% of the exam. Now, the virtual accounts we have listed here in this picture, someone commented to me, that's not a new virtual account that's been around. It is. It's an example of a virtual account, so I'm going to get that out right away. But a virtual account is used to simplify, really, password administration. You're not creating a user account and creating the password. This is the not created or deleted, like with Active Directory, like other accounts might be. There's no password management. And they can access the network using the computer's identity, not so much its own identity. We can go to the properties of a service. Go to the properties of a service. Go to the logon tab. Right, so open up your services MSC. Go to the service, the logon tab, and you can type in there what the virtual account is. In this case here, it's probably in the SQL setup that one was being done. And you can configure IIS app pools to use service accounts as well. Again, without going through the steps there, but go to the IIS app pool, go to the advanced settings, and set the service account in the identity field. Go ahead. Oh, so account policies. So the account policies, we're talking about within group policy. Account policies, we have the domain policy versus a local policy. And that's important. Most of us know that, right? But a local policy will apply to the local user accounts, and a domain policy applies to the domain user accounts. Yes. But in the question, some of us breeze through reading the question. We don't read every word, and we may not have realized that a user account, if they don't specifically call out that it's called local user 1, is a local user account, and why one password policy is taking effect over another one. So make sure you understand the password policies. Delegating password settings management, that's password settings objects, domain admin, account admins. And look at the the account lockout policies. Know if the account lockout policy is 0, if that means it'll never lock out or it's going to lock out indefinitely. Know if it's set to the longest it can be, 99999, whatever that happens to be. Know some of those obscure settings. Anyway, password settings objects, again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, the fine grain. You can keep clicking. You can make my clicking guy. We talked about that earlier with fine grain password object. Remember, the fine grain password objects password policies can be assigned to groups and to users. And that's really the important part here. You set them up, and then you link them to the user or to the group, not to the organizational unit.
And you mentioned shadow groups.
Earlier we did, yeah.
Is the password, I mean, is the fine grain password policy different than it has been the last couple of versions lately?
So the question is, did they make any changes to fine grain password policies? No. No, but again, a lot of the people in this room are still using Server 2003 and wouldn't have taken any exam that had that. So it's still relevant. Same thing like on other exams, net shell commands are still relevant because, you know, people are using older operating systems. They're trying to upgrade. And
There wasn't a lot of people. It was only like 7 people, right? Who all used in 2003?
oh my God.
Not for anything critical.
Yes.
But, so that's a yes. I'm using it. Okay. Right.
Will there be any, would you think that there would be questions around the protected users group, then, that's protected users group, that's end users?
So the question is, would there be any questions around protected user group? Again, we don't know what the questions are. Even if we did, we couldn't give specifics on what they are. We can give what's publicly available, like on the Microsoft Learning site, and what
Maybe, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's-
right.
You went on that Kerberos, like, in SPNs, and all I'm thinking about is that protected users group does have specific settings for TTL and, you know, the ticket time already pre-assigned and security related wise of what users should be in there. And then Microsoft has some reference material about not, these users should not be in there, and these users should.
So you just described basically the scenario around why protected groups work and how it works. It depends, right? You might have a case study that's telling you about an admin that wants to protect, you know, accounts from being, within a certain group. You might have the option to select protected group. Again, given that we haven't had a chance to really dig into seeing what's on the exam yet, there's a good chance they might be. We can't really tell you yes or no.
Yeah, so they basically, we look at the learning site, and then they tell us for purpose of the slide deck creation, you know, some very specific things to go over. Even if we took the exam already or we helped write the exam, we wouldn't be able to say specifically,
I would
yes,
think about
this
it,
question
but I
is
don't know
on
if
there. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
There you go. There you got it.
Just go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So let's actually go back to the first.
Yeah, that's right.
So, all right, so we shared doing these slide decks, and I was looking for pictures, and someone asked me why I chose this picture. I'm like, well, because it's backing up, and clearly we're backing up to our phone. And so they gave us a choice of pictures to use, like 12, 24 pictures, and I thought this was the best for backup because we're backing up to our phone. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
Wait, I thought you were actually going through the content.
No, because, all right, so why didn't I go through that content? Because each
Well, it's
bullet
good
point
to
has
know.
its own slide
In
coming
this
up.
section, it
Yeah,
covers all of
right.
the core components of Active Directory, the sysvol backup technology, and that's what we'll talk about now.
Backing up to your phone.
There you go. No, not backing up to your phone. Okay, well, I guess, anyway, so let's keep going. WB admin, Windows Backup Admin is a component that is built into Server 2016 still. It's still available. You can use that. You can see that you have options to do a backup target and to also include the sysvol as part of your backup solution. Now, if you don't have, some companies already have a full backup solution by net backup or whatever else they're using, but you still have to know what WB admin does. They'll be testing you on the core features. They're really looking for you to understand what you know about backing up the Active Directory and the sysvol. You also see information around the Active Directory itself and what you need to do in order to back up Active Directory. As we mentioned here, you have to stop a number of services, which you can obviously automate through script if needed to, and have that as part of a scheduled task if something needs to be backed up, and have that available. And you can also perform offline defrags. It's something that you'll see as well. You see options to optimize the Active Directory database where you have LDIF. You can manually just kick off the cleanup or the garbage collection process to free up space, and the NTDS util to basically make sure you have adequate space to hold the second set of DID files on the system itself. And you can have you still have the same options, performing authoritative versus not. This is a 3%er. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So you have a dialog box up there about services stop the Active Directory domain search. Would I be asked to know what those required services are in that dialog box?
So the question is, do I need to know what other services will be stopped? Like these specific 4 services, do I need to know that? I'm going to say you should know it, but probably not that specific on the exam.
I'm going to tell you, so the thing about the exams, and the way we've seen these exams written, they're focused on knowing what to do if something goes wrong, or knowing what to do if you want to have some feature turned on, or knowing what that command line is to execute something. The only time you get into this sort of step is if you have to walk through what you need to do to back up Active Directory. Stop this service, run this tool, and then you're done. Then at that point, you probably need to know what are those services that are running that requires to be stopped.
If this domain controller that we've just stopped the service on is the only DNS server in your environment, DNS services have just stopped, you'd want to know why, because you shut the Active Directory services, and DNS service is one of those services.
Well, or they'll ask you on the,
right?
on the exam, stop these set of services. And they'll have one question, and they'll have a number of services. If you don't know what those services are, it makes it a little bit tough, right? So actually, that's a good question.
Not actually, that was a good question. That was a good question.
And then exam tip, watch for snares where deleted objects come back into Active Directory.
Right, that's the authoritative versus non-authoritative. An authoritative restore, or an authoritative restore means it's going to come back to Active Directory, and it's going to be replicated out as a good object. Non-authoritative, it might come back in Active Directory and then be deleted again through the course of normal replication.
All right, quick question outside of the scope of the exam. Anybody used any other tools to recover deleted objects out of Active Directory? Just out of curiosity? Right, so good to know. Forget that for the exam. Focus on authoritative versus non-authoritative. There are tools out there, is my point, and they do work, but this is what they're looking for.
Is anyone here from the Active Directory team?
How are we supposed to know that, I guess?
In
theory, maybe I had a question like that on a test.
They're not going to, so the question is, how do we know about the third-party tools that might be out there? You won't be tested, like you just said, if
because
there's
we told
tests on it.
First-party tools, there's first-party tools that work. How are we supposed to know which one is the most correct answer?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so how do I know? Alfred said earlier, there might be 4 viable answers, and one of them is more correct than the rest. The basic rule of thumb when they write these exam questions is 80% of the users would do it this way 80% of the time. That's the most correct.
Yes.
If you're not within that 80%, then you may not know.
No, seriously, no.
But seriously, that's their rule of thumb.
If best practice, he probably said, it really is about what would you typically do.
Yep.
Now, most organizations, as they become much more advanced, they're going to use external third-party tools. You're going to use external third-party tools to do things like backups, to do things like automation work. They're not looking for you to know that. They want to understand that you have a general knowledge of how to manage Windows or manage Server 2016 in your environment and the management around it. So is the exam going to test you on a third-party tool? Probably not. You might have a scenario that talks about it. I'm not sure because I haven't seen, but you're really looking for WB admin, you're looking for PowerShell scripts that you might use, things that you're familiar with that's inherent within the tools that are part of the solution, right? So that's how you know. I mean, I guess we're kind of giving you the confidence that you don't have to worry about, some net iOS company that needs to be installed. They might give you, so you're talking, he said he was talking about different types of ways of doing the same thing.
They're not going to confuse you. You're going to know which first-party tool that they're talking about.
They'll give you hints. No.
How long ago? Because that's
2 weeks ago? 4/11?
You have to look at the scenario. So
Right.
he mentioned in 7411, you have to look at the scenario that they're asking you about. And there are hints and clues within the question that specifically is calling out what they're needing you to do, right? And you mentioned LDIF, or doing a backup through LDIF, or all the other scenarios. And they might say, what's the easiest way to do this task? Or the most efficient way to do this task? Or the least costly way to do it.
A lot of times it's easier just to say recycle bin because that's fairly new.
And you can
just
do
gonna
it.
say recycle
Doesn't
bin.
require a lot of
But
administrative
that's not
work.
always the right answer.
The other one might. That's server. That's another server exam. Yep. Server
So
42.
another comment was, one of the pieces of the scenario might be the domain function level, right? So there was no recycle bin in domain function level server
There you
2003.
go.
But I get everything on TechNet, it's fair game. But like, I can't go on TechNet and says, this is the one you should definitely most likely use. Right? That's just as tough to figure out.
Yeah, and that's why we're here, right? So
I'm also going to point out on the Microsoft Learning page for that exam, and for all exams, if you read about halfway down, it says, if you have an exam challenge, please click here. An exam challenge doesn't mean, hey, I want this question to be part of the exam. It means, I got a question on the exam, I think you marked it wrong, and I want to know why it was marked wrong. This is why I think it's marked right.
yes.
That's if you go to your
Microsoft
favorite
Learning.
Bing engine and go
Go to Microsoft
70-411, and then right under the calculator result, click the
And tell
test
them
result.
your recycle bin answer sucks.
Yeah, and halfway through, it's going to say exam challenge.
Yeah.
so
challenge it.
Yeah. So to submit an exam challenge, there's a link right there on every exam page. There's a link. Exam.
All right, let's keep going. Time's a ticking here. All right, so
That's what I thought.
RODC, again, RODC still exists. Read-only domain controller, replication and password policies, deciding on how you want to set up your read. I hate saying RODC. Replication.
Read-only domain controller, right. So one thing to keep in mind is even though it's a read-only domain controller, administrators technically still can change a user's password. A user in a branch office that's being authenticated by the read-only domain controller, if they go to change their password, it's still going to go, it's going to change, like Control-Alt-Delete change password changes on a writable domain controller, but if an administrator went to change a password or did something writable, it's just going to get overwritten. So it's not prevented from happening, but it gets overwritten during the normal course of replication.
So we've listed out the options again, as well as the password replication policies. We being able to determine whether the RODC should be shared or on the user or computer password. I think you just mentioned some of that. Okay, so the next section is configuring Active Directory in a complex
He's got a complex drawing on his monitor.
See, he knows how to pick slides, but we got to get him.
Upgrade, right? We're going to talk about multi-domain, multi-forest.
Boy, you got to get him proportion though. That's the
Multiple UPNs, right? Use the UPN part of your name.
Okay, let's keep. So configuring a forest or domain.
So we know, some of us know this already. The domain function level, all domain controllers in the domain have to be running at minimum of this. Server 2003, Server 2008, Server 2012, Server 2016. Forest function level, all DCs in the forest must be running at least this. And all the domains have to be upgraded as well to that. So as I just said, to upgrade the forest function levels, first DCs have to be upgraded to the new OS, and then the domain function level has to be upgraded, and then the forest function level needs to be upgraded. Why do I raise the forest function level? To gain a feature. We just talked about Server 2003 didn't have a recycle bin, but 2008 does. We talked about earlier that the time-bombed or the time-limited group memberships require 2016. 2012 didn't have that. You upgrade the function level to gain a feature. If you're not gaining any features, there's almost no reason to do it, but you'll always gain something. You're always getting some feature. Multiple UPN suffixes. At Microsoft, I'm in the North America domain, so it's northamerica.corp.microsoft.com. I think that's the order in which it goes.
What's the path? Just kidding.
Anyway, northamerica.corp.microsoft.com, but I can sign in with my alias at microsoft.com, right? So it just simplifies my login. I don't have to type in alias at northamerica.corp.microsoft.com. I can just type in at microsoft.com because we have multiple UPN suffixes.
And you have to be a domain admin or EA, enterprise admin,
To add new UPN suffixes.
You see that a lot when you're dealing with Azure AD Active Directory Connect, or any sort of identity-based configurations where you need to have multiple UPNs associated with the same domain, or ADFS as well.
Types of trusts. We have the forest trust, this forest trust, this forest. We know the trusted versus trusting. We have shortcut trust. One domain of this forest is going to trust one of the domains of this forest and everything under it, the shortcut trust. External trusts are non-transitive, where it's simply this domain to this domain. And a forest realm trust. I need to have some kind of trust with a Unix Kerberos, a non-Windows Kerberos environment.
This hasn't changed. Again,
Yeah.
it's very important to know because they still will test you on it. Additional trust information as well. We talk about the types of trust authentications you can have. You can have a domain-wide trust. You can have a selective or forest-wide trust. And it'd be basically things like granting all users access in the forest. Know what options you need to select when you're setting up a trust. And if you're having to deal with name suffix routing, that comes up as a section. Make sure that you understand what those options are and how you can actually set it up. For example, if it's comprised of a wildcard, you can have a DNS suffix associated with it, like a star.contosa.com. And SID filtering, the ability to basically filter out access based on the SID of the user or user object, and prevent them access to a trusted forest based on that SID filtering. You can also quarantine and keep them disabled for an amount of time. So if you do get questions on the exam around that, know how to decide what needs to happen for a specific user or a specific realm if they need a trust in place, and the type of trust to use.
This just-in-time forest, we kind of mentioned at the beginning of the session. This is where, again, you have these new features in 2016. We want to test them out. You're creating this forest, again, at the forest function level of 2016. You're going to create this shadow group, add the users from the other forest into this new forest so you can test out some of these new features. You can see, unlike the security group, security identifier within the domain in another forest.
Can I walk through this?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I forgot this was a build slide.
You do the build slide.
Yeah, you can do it.
Come on.
There's too many buttons on that.
I don't know what the button. All right, here we go. You talk to it. What happens?
Where do we start? Go back to the
We're
beginning.
creating a just-in-time
So
forest.
we have our existing forest. Our user Jane or Mary is in this. We'll call it domain admins group. So we want to test out some of the new features of the new forest. So we create the new forest. We install a domain controller.
Jane?
I don't know. She looks like a Jane. And a new domain. We create a new domain in a new forest, and we make sure it's a Server 2016 forest function level. We then create this
PIM Forest Trust.
Thank you. The Privileged ID Management Trust. So we make sure that these two forests do trust each other. Again, it's Privileged ID Management Forest Trust. And then we add her account into, just do one more. Yeah. Into the new group with a time to live group membership.
So at that point, the user has access to it for a certain amount of time. So that JIT forest is really helpful when you want to provide access to a specific user in a specific forest for a certain amount of time. Keep that in mind for the exam. This is something that's new for 2016 forest. And that you can use.
And one of the benefits is you can really minimize how many users are in your domain admins groups. You just need the one that's able to create these or add other ones in as a time-bound group membership, and then add them as necessary. Yeah, so the comment is they can make a request and it has to get approved. Yeah, once it gets approved, they can get added in. All right, Active Directory sites and services. So Active Directory sites and services is used really by the domain controllers to make sure, and by the client machines and by DNS, to make sure that users are authenticating or computers are authenticating to their closest domain controller based on DNS, site links. It's also used by domain controllers to optimize replication traffic. All replication traffic will make it to all domain controllers within 3 hops based on their site links. There's going to be a precedence on the site links. So this Active Directory site, a site basically is a virtual representation of your physical infrastructure, right? So Active Directory sites and services isn't a router. It just says, I have users in Minneapolis, I have users in London, I have users in Hong Kong. Logical, right, not virtual, logical. And so you want to put all the subnets of Minneapolis in the Minneapolis site, and all the subnets of Hong Kong in the Hong Kong site, and so on and so forth, and let the domain controllers figure out their best replication traffic based on the algorithms that they use.
And you made some points on what you need to do to move a domain into between sites. And one of the things that I think I want to point out is ensure the domain controller is not the preferred bridgehead server. If that's the case, you need to change the role from the bridgehead server and give it to another server in that domain.
In that site.
Yeah, in that site, and then be able to move that server to a different domain.
This is a lot of words here. You are the administrator for corp.contosa.com. Your company password policy states that users must change their passwords every 60 days. We actually talked about this. However, a new security policy states that members of the legal department should be required to change their password every 30 days. You need to ensure the users of the legal department are required to change their password every 30 days. You must accomplish this with the least amount of administrative effort. What should you do? Now, just as a tip, the reason why that sentence gets put in there, and that's not just for this because I couldn't think of anything else, but for real, is because I said earlier, coming up with distractors is tough. Distractors are the fake answers that look real enough and believable enough. So they may have to do something like, I don't know, create another domain. Will that work? Sure it will, but there's a lot of administrative effort to that. So we then add that sentence to make sure that that is no longer a believable answer. Anyway, so create a child domain named legal.corp.contosa.com, add the users to the new domain, change the default password policy. All right, we'll just say, I don't know. You all read it while I was talking, so. All right, so I cannot type the word settings to save my life. That has to autocorrect for me. I always forget to set it to, but that's true on my phone and it's true on a computer. I can't.
So he just wanted you guys to get it, that's all.
Go back. So the answer was D, create the security group named legal, add the users to the legal security group, create the PSO, and link it to the group.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so tips.
You can read them. Stop talking.
So tip number 1, service accounts are for single servers. Group managed service accounts can be used for account systems as well. Number 2, know the difference between, know how to use Azure Active Directory. I keep going to Azure. Active Directory Administration Center and the ADUC, the difference between the two, one has a PowerShell built into it. It lets you know what you're doing under the belt. And know how to configure site links to optimize replication authentication traffic. We have 3 more sections. Create and manage group policies. Now again, some of this is not new information. Therefore, we may be able to kind of get through it a little quicker. We still have the ability to use templates for group policy objects. We have the central store that's available. Keep in mind that you can still use ADMX files within your system root and your sysvol. And if they're asking you questions around where to store that information, that's the path. You can make it a shareable link and copy the files to that location.
So an example of when I would do this kind of goes sort of to a Windows 10 exam, is if I have a Server 2012 domain controller, but I have Windows 10 clients, I need to manage the Windows 10 clients with group policy. I'm going to have to grab the ADMX and ADML files from the Windows 10 client and copy them into my central store on the domain controller. And that's where something like that would come in handy.
And we have starter GPOs. They're still there. They function just like templates where you use it to build the GPO that you want to have. And things to know about the processing. Remember, local sites, group policy processing, local sites to sites, sites to domains, domains to OUs.
Yep.
That logic will always follow. When you get an exam question, think through what you're being asked to do and how the policy affects that user, how it gets down to that user.
So again, last one in wins if it's during a conflict. So local policy, then the site level policy, the domain level policy, the OU, child OU from there. Also know block inheritance, enforced. Those have not changed. Block inheritance means that the policies from above will not trickle down. Enforced means even if I've blocked inheritance, this group policy object is going to trickle down anyway.
Again, we want you to kind of listen to the information we're providing because there might be something in here that you don't know yet. And those are the things that we want you to be able to write down and go back and research prior to taking the exam.
I'm just going to go back one. So the last bullet point there, the slow link processing. There are certain policies that won't go during a slow link processing. And slow link processing means the client's going to see how fast it is to connect to the domain controller it's getting group policy from. If it's 500K or slower, it's not going to pull down specific policy settings. It will do security ones, but something like installing software, that's not going to come down as a setting over slow link. You can find a list of all the slow link policies that won't come down, all the policies won't come down, by looking at the computer configuration, administrative template, system group policy setting, because it actually lists what won't be processed. Filtering group policies, we can use WMI filters. We have Windows 7 and Windows 10 computers in the same OU. We want to set a policy that's available on all machines, but make sure it only is affected on the Windows 10 machines. Use a WMI filter to cert to link it to the OU, but only apply to Windows 10 machines.
And remember, you still have options to manage GPOs. We have backup GPOs, import GPOs. How many people work with GPOs on a day-to-day basis?
Probably most people in the room.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's good to know this for the exam. If you're already somewhat well proficient on it, it makes it easier for you. We also added in there creating a migration table and how to use the table editor on GPOs itself. Make sure you're familiar with that process. We have options for group policy infrastructure status. This is something that's we saw.
Yeah, so this is new from 2012. So group policy management console, group policy and Active Directory aren't the only things that might be wrong on why a group policy isn't being processed. It could be a DNS issue. It could be something else on the network. So the group policy infrastructure status node within the group policy management console will let you know, yes, replication between those two domain controllers is working, or no, it's not, and that's why the policy didn't apply as expected.
We talk about group policy processing. Again, same thing. Resultant set of policies will show you that information in terms of how your group policy is processing. And for the sake of time, I won't go too much into it, but make sure you understand the group policy processing and how that works. We mentioned some of this already in the past.
So how many people here actually use group policy to deploy software? To deploy software?
That was a trick
Yeah,
question.
we're using System Center to deploy software, or maybe even some other tools, but group policy to deploy software?
Some people use it.
Some people do use it.
I have the silent install for System Center as an MSI. Just to make sure when a PC joins the domain, it keeps it.
There you go.
All right, there you go. All right, so the comment was there are certain things like the configuration manager client that you may want to make sure it gets installed every time a machine joins the domain, so you might do it that way.
So it's still useful for
Yep, so it is useful. Know how you can deploy software at the computer level or at the user level. At the computer level, it might be installed by default. At the user level, it might be installed when they click a link, or it might be installable when they go to control panel.
So exam tip?
Exam tip, assigning versus publishing software. Assigning
Still
creates a
matters.
start menu icon. They click on it, it installs the software. Publishing makes it available in the control panel, as I was saying. Yeah. We just have a couple of common group policies. Folder redirection. We want to make sure that the user's documents and desktop get redirected, so if they log on anywhere, the documents follow them around. Scripts, right? A lot of us do log on scripts, startup scripts, shutdown scripts, log off scripts, and different security templates. And we have some security templates in the table here.
Yeah, make sure you know the different security templates, what they're in there. We've listed them out for you because they might ask you to apply it for a specific set of groups, or a scenario that's looking for high level of security. You're not going to select just the DC security INF file. You're going to want the high security script that can support it.
We know administrative templates, for the most part, modify the registry. So you want the administrative templates, some of the common ones, the computer configuration, HQ local machine, user configuration, HQ current user, not HQ users. So make sure you know which ones you're setting. Also know that if you've enabled a policy setting and you now need to not configure it, once it's set in the registry as enabled, when you go to not configured, it's still set in the registry as enabled. If you want to remove it, you need to either set up a script to remove that key altogether or set it to disabled. It's called tattooing in the registry.
Is that on the exam though?
Sure. That might be on the exam, actually, that you set it to enabled and then set it to configured, but the policy still is applying because it got tattooed. Group policy preferences, again, not new to 2016, but they allow you to do things that you can't normally do with normal group policies. Map network drives and make sure that they're persistently mapped every time, even if the user unmaps it. Or network shares, or printers and IE favorites, I think.
We listed out a number of them,
Yep.
so make sure you're looking through that during that process.
Gonna skip it?
Yeah, we're going to skip.
In the interest of time, we're going to skip this one. The answer was A. There we go.
Good job. Good job. Good job. It's in there for you to review later.
A couple of tips. Again, the ADMX Central Store. You can take them out, take the ADMX and ADML. ADMX is the template. ADML is the language-specific
You need
template
both.
from the Windows 10 client computer in my earlier example, and add it to the Central Store. Scripts, we just said startup scripts, logon scripts, log off scripts, shutdown scripts. Really, that's the order in which they would be done. The startup and shutdown are computer-based, and the log-on, log-off are user-based. Group policy can be used for software installation. We talked about assigning software versus publishing software, and assigning it or publishing it to the computer versus the user. And group policy management console, infrastructure status, can just make sure that the infrastructure is up and running.
Two more sections, Active Directory Certificate Services and Active Directory Federation Service. We're going to try to get through the rest of this because it's good content to cover. ADCS, we start off with Active Directory Certificate Services. Things to keep in mind. Know how to set up your enterprise CA. Make sure you understand what's required to set up the CA. When they may ask you to walk through that process of setting up the certificate of authority. Know when to what you're going to try to install. For example, if you're going to use a web enrollment or the online responder or even the NDES server for device registration, make sure you know what those options are. We also included a PowerShell command that kind of talks about how to enable that certificate component to include and also include management tools as part of it.
I was going to say there might be a typo in there. I don't think there's a hyphen between AD and certificates. That's all.
Certificate service. We're going to keep going. Things to think about. If I'm going to set up a standalone CA, you can do that. If you're using a curl, which is a certificate revocation list, in other words, if you can actually have a curl that's available to be able to decide who has been revoked. If they can't access it, the system may not be able to process the requests. The online responder that basically receives the request for the certificate, know about those, and how to back up and recover your certificate services. The cert util command comes in very handy. If you ever need to look it up, just do a cert util / and it'll show you all those commands as well. Managing certificates is also in here too. We talk about how to use those templates to create certificates. Make sure you're actually going in there and testing out certificates and using things like auto-enrollment where you're actually saying, I want this machine when it joins the domain to automatically have this certificate on it, or if these servers are being used for a specific purpose, you can have those certificates available through the process of auto-enrollment and also being able to renew them as needed. And lastly, just the key recovery agents that are needed if you have to get the certificate back. It has to be registered with the CA itself. Okay, is it short enough? No?
Yeah, you are the security admin for Contoso.com. Contoso.com. Contoso has an enterprise CA named CA1. You need to delete a certificate from the certificate store on CA1. Which cert util command would you use? Cert util.exe revoke, view del store, dump, or delete row.
A, revoke.
How many think A? Thank you. Someone just said, you said delete though. Yes, revoke will not delete. It'll simply revoke.
Yes.
How many people think B? 1, half, and 1. So, okay, so a couple people think B.
You said delete though.
You did say delete though. I'm going to skip over that one for a second. How many people think dump? C.
Dude, you said delete.
How many think delete row? All right, delete row will delete the row from the database, will not actually delete the certificate.
All right, let's see.
The answer is view del store. You use the view del store, can actually be used to delete a certificate as well as view the deleted certificates.
There are other command lines, but again, we're just basically going through sort of a sample scenario. So again,
but that was a good point. Yeah, revoke. The question didn't ask you how to revoke. It asked you how to delete. Revoke doesn't delete. It just
very
revokes.
Important part. Tips are here. Check them out. We're going to just dive into ADFS for the last few minutes that we have. A few seconds. So we look at some of the new features in ADFS 2016. The farm behavior level FBLs basically been changed as integers and not strings. You can actually, this is basically available in, well, the current version of Server 2016. Yep. You can run in mixed mode. Basically, you can have different you can have Server 2016 and 2012 running in your same ADFS environment, but you can't upgrade the OS from the server. You can't upgrade the server from 2012 R2 to Windows Server 2016. You have to install a new server 2016 and move forward from there. We talk about the upgrade process to getting to the 2016 on ADFS. We've kind of walked you through that process step by step on how to actually get to the server 2016 and migrating your workloads to server 2016 and making sure things are working well. We talk about claims rules, and relying party trust. Again, this is all ADFS. For those of you guys who are identity admins, you're probably familiar with what a claim is, understand what a claims rule is, basically what you're saying, deciding on what the user can access based on the deny rules and any relying party trust. And then just knowing that relying party trusts are also important to make sure that they have access to the resources they need. And they're basically claims aware and can be, or non-claims aware, depending on how you configure them. We have additional info basically for Active Directory Federation services. We have access control policies that basically enforce policies, and you can also create them through templates. We also see the auditing enhancement in 2016. Before we didn't have as much auditing in place. Now we see that you can actually get ADFS properties and a number of other features to see what's going on with your ADFS environment. There are quite a bit of changes in ADFS 2016, and definitely, one of the things we want you to do is when you get your Server 2016 image, build it, test it, see what it looks like so you can actually utilize it. We've added additional links for authentication, MFA, which is part of the ADFS. It will give you things like asking for previous logon information, we'll ask for MFA if previous logon was not MFA. Right. So one thing to keep in mind. Device registration plays a big part in this. You have, it has things built in for conditional access as part of it, where it just automatically knows if you're part of the domain, and it can use Windows Hello and Windows Passport to allow you access to ADFS. So these things are things you want to kind of think about during the ADFS portion. They're going to ask you questions around ADFS and Azure apps and Office 365 apps having access to ADFS. That's all part of this exam. And lastly, the web application proxy. George mentioned this in his last section. It's one of those roles that sits on the perimeter network and allows remote access, and it prevents you from having to expose ADFS to the external network. So remember that WAP is always in front. It uses basic authentication. The number of features that are available, it can do HTTP to HTTPS redirection. It can use wildcard domain publishing, which is spelled wrong, but you can still use it. And we gave you
what's wrong with that?
And we gave you a couple links in here to reference for more details. We talk about how to install the web application proxy. You can see it here before installation and what you need to do to get it on, and the authentication methods that are part of it. Now, again, it's not a full install, it's just a web application proxy, and it's something that's available on your system. We show you basically where the web application proxy sits. You can see it's on the perimeter network, but you can publish things like SharePoint, Exchange, remote desktop access, and line of business apps. It's basically for managing access to on-prem resources and identifying, being able to allow users to take their claims as needed.
We're gonna wrap up.
Okay, so this part, you still have questions there. We're gonna. That was like a couple. These are cool. I want to do one. Hold on. Let's do this last question. We even didn't cover this question. We'll do this last question.
This ADFS, later. We kind of did. So you are the administrator for Contoso.com. Contoso is doing business with several other companies. Thank you very much. You have a server named ADFS1 that runs. I create the questions. I give the questions to two other people to make sure that they're right. You have a server, and he's one of them. No, you have a server named ADFS1 that runs Active Directory Federation Services role. One of the relying parties has mandated all Contoso users are to authenticate using both certificate authentication and Windows authentication, you need to configure this on ADFS1. What should you do? Create and configure a global authentication policy, a relying party trust, a transform claim rule, or a delegation authorization rule.
Create and configure a global authentication policy that affects the whole environment. How many people think it's A? Yeah, so that's good. You're actually picking out words in there. How many people think it's B, relying party trust? All right. Transform claim rules and delegation authorization rules. And it was A. So
It's A.
The global authentication policies. Again, 5 sections. We went through the last one a little bit quick, but we wanted to make sure we get through it. We only get 75 minutes to cover the content. We covered all of them as much as possible.
In 80 minutes.
We don't.
Sorry.
The resources that are available are really just what's new in Server 2016 and identity. Check out the Microsoft Virtual Academy. There's a lot of sessions that you can cover, and it'll give you a chance. Now, the exam rooms are across the way, but this exam you cannot take yet. You can take any other exams. So we wish you guys luck the rest of Tech Ready. Again, thanks for joining the
Question
session
at the
today.
front.
Oh. And we will make the slides available. Like we mentioned, it's going to be something that we have to talk to them about and make sure it's available. Again, thanks for coming, you guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget to do your evaluations.